Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Our next speaker, as you may have noticed from looking at the screen, has something to do with bees. I was talking with Dr. Weeks before the break, or during the break, and comes to us. This is the first time. We've invited him to come for about 15 years, and this was the first time that our schedules were able to coincide. There were several things about his background that intrigued me. Number one, of course, is the bees and the bee venom and those kind of things for therapeutic use. And something else that you can read in his biography, and please do pick up biographies because it gives a much more detailed and complete description of our speakers than we're able to do from here, is the fact that he has worked with Dr. Michael Hollick at Boston University. And Dr. Hollick is one of the foremost worldwide experts in vitamin D, and he's one of the first to call it to our attention that the majority of the people in the world, at least in the northern climes, are deficient in vitamin D and what all of those problems cause. Something else that's interesting about Dr. Weeks is that he became a physician kind of as a career change. He had already been involved in other work. And I asked him before if he ever practiced conventional medicine. And he said, no, he didn't. So he has always practiced some form of integrative or holistic medicine. And today he's going to talk to us about bee venom therapy for arthritis, MS, and cancer. And please join me in welcoming him, and do pick up the biography and get the rest of the biographical information about him. Dr. Weeks, it's a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Frank. Well, this is very exciting. For me, to try to do all this in 25 minutes, I want you to fasten your seatbelts. Let me start by saying, if anyone has any questions, please do email me, and I'll be glad to send the slides to people, anything they need to help them understand this, because we're going to go pretty quickly. Just as a quick segue, this is our friend the honeybee. Notice that she is a vegetarian. She's fuzzy like a teddy bear. She's friendly. She's pretty much nonviolent compared to the wasps, hornets, and yellow jackets. So we're going to try to befriend her as the talk goes on. But Michael Hollick's work in vitamin D is very important in terms of light metabolism. And I would say, since we are in California and I can get away with these things, I would say that bee venom is primarily, I would say, distilled sunlight. So let's go to the start here. I'll talk today about arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and cancer. And I wanted to start by thanking Lorraine. She's invited me for about 15 years to come down here, and finally I've come here, and it's a wonderful group of people. I'm very appreciative for being able to be here. And I'm also appreciative for Charlie and Margaret Mraz, who back in the early 80s introduced me to bee venom therapy and the work of the Apitherapy. Now deceased, they're both taught me a tremendous amount about patient interaction. Charlie's credentials were nothing. He dropped out of high school, became one of the most influential beekeepers in the world. He invented many aspects of beekeeping. This is the original venom extraction, and this is working in his laboratory. He sold pure bee venom to Pharmacia Corporation. He was the gold standard for production of bee venom in the world. Patented nothing, had no interest in that, just went ahead. He and I formed the American Apitherapy Society with a courageous group of PhDs, patients, and medical doctors years ago. That's still going strong. We have the president of the Apitherapy Society, Andrew Koken, in the room, and so if you have questions, apitherapy.org. And he was also featured recently in CBS News Sunday morning, The Wonderful World of Bees, excellent publications. So Charlie and I traveled the world teaching people about bee venom. I like the Army slogan. You know, to join the Army, they say, join the Army, you get to meet, you travel the world, you get to meet interesting people, then you get to shoot them. In the Apitherapy Society, it was similar. You could travel the world, meet interesting people, and then sting them. This is the head of the French NIH, François Riegère. Charlie and I lectured extensively in Europe, and here he's being treated for an arthritis. His son had multiple sclerosis. Many of you will recognize the young doctor on the right, Dietrich Klinkhardt, who came to Vermont, and we collaborated in bee venom work early on. And again, back to our friend the honeybee. Now, so what is apitherapy, and why haven't we read about it in the big peer-reviewed scientific journals? Well, it was alluded to this morning, and I concur that these journals are fundamentally bought and sold by the pharmaceutical corporations. I'm sorry to say that. I read any scientific journal, I read the bottom left side of the page first, which says who paid for it. That tells us a lot. So while I do read these journals and I find them interesting, I want to recommend that everyone read the Journal of Orthomolecular Medicine, Abram Hoffer's 35-year publication. It's superb. And after that, I always go to the National Enquirer and I go to the Sun. You can pick these up easily at your grocery store. Why would I recommend that? Well, here in California, who has not seen Men in Black? All right, so everyone remembers the problem is these men in black are charged with saving the world from aliens, and there's a terrible bug who's going to destroy the world who lands someplace, and these men in black have to find where he is. Do you remember how they found where the bug had landed? They went to the National Enquirer, and they saw an article that said, alien steals my husband's skin. And in fact, Tommy Lee Jones says, good, that means the alien we're looking for landed over here in Ohio. So if you really want the news, I'd suggest you go to the National Enquirer or the Sun. They talk about bee venom, they talk about honey and vinegar. And here's from the Sun, dateline 1991, man's arthritis cured by falling into beehive. I used to read these articles all the time. Accidental topple into beehives results in thousands of stings and necessitated a rush to the hospital in Hartford, Connecticut, but George Farmer lived to tell the story. He was so covered with bees that you couldn't see any part of his body, reports his beekeeping son, Mark. Talk about an edible thing here, right? Pushes his father into a beehive, maybe. The patient went through a typical healing crisis where he was bloated and red like an overripe tomato, but the next day he was sitting up in bed and joking, even though he still looked like a raw hamburger. I feel wonderful, George says. There isn't a single ache or pain anywhere. I haven't felt this good in 30 years. And his medical doctor, Nolan Johnson, credits George's astonishing cure to bee stings. So this is really the state of bee venom back in the early 90s, as nobody really knew why, but there was a lot of anecdotal evidence that if you got stung by thousands of bees and didn't die, you might feel the better for it. The Drudge Report in 2004, articles like this were all over the internet. Woman who stings herself with bees to control multiple sclerosis, 2004. She admits it hurts, but Paula Cook believes that allowing herself to be stung by bees every day is helping her battle against multiple sclerosis. So what are we talking about? Apis is Latin for bee. Therefore, apitherapy is the therapeutic use of any honeybee products for health. And these include, and I'm going to run through these quickly. Usually my talks will include elaborate details on all these products because they're all extraordinary. But here's the raw honey. Here's the pollen. Another picture of the bee delivering pollen. Propolis, also called Russian penicillin, very high in bioflavonoids, is what the bees use to caulk their hive. It's this gooey substance. Beeswax has about 400 components, 111 of which are aromatic substances. There's essential oils here. Another look at the beeswax. Larvae is a high form of pupae. It's good for protein. And here on the left you see the larvae is sitting in a bath of royal jelly, an extraordinary substance which itself merits a whole discussion. So before I get back to the venom, I can't resist telling you a little bit about raw honey because I use this in my practice extensively. I dress my surgical wounds with this. We get less scarring, better resolution. Honey converts to hydrogen peroxide, 20 parts per million. It's an ideal antiseptic. We use it topically for the dressings as an antifungal, anti-acne. It's got alpha and beta hydroxy acids in it, so it strips the skin nicely and regenerates. We use it topically for pink eye, intranasal for pharyngitis, and topically for herpes simplex. Orally, it is safe for infants despite the research, which is controversial, and it actually lowers blood sugar, funnily enough. Here's a study out of Journal of Medical Foods, 2004, that natural honey compared to dextrose and sucrose lowered glucose. Here's interesting. Actually has a low glycemic index. Raw honey has to be converted in the liver by an enzyme called invertase before it becomes bioavailable blood sugar, so it's a slow-burning sugar. And it also lowers C-reactive protein, homocysteine, and blood lipids. So When I give you references like this, I hope you'll maybe go to the internet and do your own research, because to go into each of these studies would take too long. Here's something fun: topical honey application versus acyclovir for the treatment of recurrent herpes simplex. This is done in the United Arab Emirates. Notice that most of the research on bee venom will not be in America. It'll be in other countries. There are 2 cases of labial herpes, 1 case of genital herpes completely remitted with the use of honey. The study involved 30 patients, and and raw honey was far superior to acyclovir. The conclusion: topical honey application, safe and effective in the management of signs and symptoms of recurrent lesions of labial and genital herpes. Here's the reason you haven't really heard about raw honey. Cost of acyclovir, $3,800 a pound. Cost of raw honey, $15 a pound. Now, along those lines, I have nothing else to sell you guys. I don't have a book. I don't have anything fancy. There's nothing to buy except for I hope you'll pay attention, and I hope that although I would expect you will not incorporate bee venom right away in your practices or lives, you should incorporate raw honey. Easy and delightful for all sorts of things. Honey may prevent recurring tumors. Here's a study out of Turkey, published in the Archives of Surgery. What they did is they actually seeded cancer cells in rats, and then they kind of spread raw honey on the site versus nothing. And the seeded cancer that had the raw honey had 3 out of 30 mice got the cancer developed, whereas 30 out of 30 without the raw honey got the cancer. Now, it's interesting, and in fact, a Mayo Clinic cancer expert said, "These results, though preliminary, are too fascinating to be dismissed." So I'm going to leave honey, but you want to really quickly understand that raw honey, when you put it in warm water, will look on the left-hand side. It has not been cooked. The gentleman before us spoke and said after 115 degrees, you lose your enzymes in raw foods. Raw honey should be purchased on the left. It will not dissipate, otherwise it would be. It's just a visual for you. Now, quickly, venoms as medicines. Well, poison is a matter of dosage, says Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim Paracelsus, a great hero of mine in the 1400s. Poison is a matter of dosage. Lesdunsky is a great friend of mine in France. He's done probably most of the research on venoms. He's used scorpion and sea anemones and snake venoms and bee venom, which is how we met. If you search Lesdunsky under the internet, you will find superb references for venoms in medicine. We've learned that mollusks give us pain medications, the frog venoms give us antibiotics, spiders give us antiarrhythmic medications and anti-cancer medications, scorpions can be helpful for brain cancer, snakes give us anti-cancer and anticoagulants, and of course the Hymenoptera, the wasp, yellow jacket, and hornets and so forth all have a good venom. Here's the Conus marmocus, which is the marbled cone. This new painkiller from this venom is 10,000 times stronger than morphine, published in Nature. 2002, there's a San Jose doctor using this, finding very good success for chronic pain. Scorpion, our friends up there on the left, has venom which is very effective in inhibiting atrial fibrillation. Scorpion, I'm sorry, that was a tarantula before. The scorpion here, we're using venom to test against brain cancers. This is published. Where do you find scorpions? If you go to Thailand, as I did, you'll find scorpions crawling all over the place. Here's a lady at dinner who was entertaining us by walking around full of scorpions. Now, snake venom. Snake venom is probably the most studied of the venoms, and there's evidence to show that it actually inhibits certain cancers, and it's a biologically potent substance. Many of my patients will say, well, when you do bee venom, Dr. Weeks, are you going to use live bees or are you going to use injectable bee venom? And the answer is, depending upon what their preference is, we can use both. I don't think the snake venom doctors are ever asked if they're going to use live snakes or injectable snake venom. And here's the reason why. Don't try this kind of snake venom therapy at home. You might run into something like this. This is really partly to gross you up, but partly to wake you up, keep you with me. Snake venom is something that I do not endorse, especially in this methodology. Bee venom. Here's bees crawling out of the hives. They're very irritated. Here's where we collect the venom. This is adequate protection in collecting venom. And a lot of my patients say, well, isn't it scary collecting venom? And I would say, look, I'm from the Northwest. I have people up there who I know who actually go sea kayaking. You think bee venom is dangerous? Try sea kayaking. Here's a 4-meter great white shark chasing someone in a 3.8-meter kayak. And to me, this is terrifying. And this looks kind of tame in comparison. Okay, honeybee venom, there's 70 biologically active components. I like to think about the front line. the running backs, and the utility players. Coming from Seattle, football metaphors might be helpful. So when you think about the venom, there's some components of the venom which act like the front line. They push people around, they soften up tissue, and then you have the running backs that get through and do very precise biological behavior. So coming from Seattle, you know, we are the world champion Super Bowl heroes from last year. We won the Super Bowl, except the refs don't really agree with us, but in Seattle you can ask us and we'll tell you we won the Super Bowl. So the front line, these people push things around, and the venoms have things like surfactants. Compound X is a powerful lowerer of surface tension, so they let the other venom components penetrate into the skin. Hyaluronidase is an enzyme which loosens or digests the hyaluron, which is a substance that holds cells together. It's very important because many cancers depend upon adequate amounts of hyaluron to allow for more blood vessel development and feeding of the tumor, and venom has in it a very specific destroyer of that substrate that cancers rely upon. Phospholipase A2 is a large molecule. It can be allergenic. It attacks lecithin at cell walls and converts to lysolecithin, which destroys the red blood cells. It's a penetrant. It's also a powerful emulsifier, which, working in conjunction with the hyaluronidase, facilitates cleaning of the cells and is a preventive against cancer, kind of a fire hose effect. Histamine we know about. It's released by something called MCDP, or mast cell degranulating peptide, and they allow the running backs, so to speak, which I'm going to talk about next, to penetrate. Melatonin, very important. It stimulates the pituitary gland and releases ACTH, which stimulates the adrenals to produce hydrocortisol. It also inhibits the omega-3 arachidonic acid, the conversion to prostaglandin E2. It does this better than aspirin. This was published in 1974 in Nature. Melatonin is 100 times more potent as an anti-inflammatory agent than cortisol used in the rat model. It also inhibits superoxide production in white blood cells. More running backs are adolapin. This is a very potent anti-inflammatory agent. All of these are uniquely in bee venom. It inhibits the COX-2 better than indomethacin. It also inhibits the phospholipase A2. Adolapin, a better anti-inflammatory than ACTH and the glucocorticoids, because unlike the former, the ACTH, it does not inactivate the pituitary gland. Unlike the latter, the glucocorticoids, it does not inactivate the adrenal cortex. So we have a really superb agent here. It also reduces vasodilation. That'll inhibit cancer growth. Capillary permeability. It'll inhibit metastatic processes. It also reduces diapedesis, or movement of the leukocytes. That can be good and bad. It also stimulates cyclic AMP. It increases glucocorticoid synthesis and increases the stability of the lysosomes. Mast cell degranulating peptide leads to the release of this histamine. It has 2 sulfide bonds, which is interesting. Sulfur you always want to look for in biological substances. Very, very common in venoms. So we get some swelling with the mast cell degranulating peptide. So I always want people to know, if you're going to do anything with the bee venom work, you need to have a bee sting kit available. You need to know how to use it. Otherwise, here's a picture of yours truly. I was helping some friends hive a swarm of bees, and I happened to get 1 bee sting on my right eyelid because I gave my mask and protective stuff to the kid I was working with. That's T equals 0 times 0. 2 hours later, my wife said I should not show you this, but I thought I would, just again to wake you up. I have to admit, this is me. Now, I was stung over that, what looks to you like my left side, and who in the world thinks this is an allergic reaction? Raise your hands. Shame on you, Dr. Ayer. An allergy is, by definition, systemic. You cannot have a localized allergic reaction. Most of the people who go to the emergency room says, oh, I was stung by a bee, I swelled up. The doctor says, allergy. It's not an allergic reaction. This is a local, I would say highly organized immune response. So I wasn't at all perturbed by this. My wife was freaked out. But that's what can happen, and people can get within a couple hours. I would also say that this is a good test for AIDS. I do not have AIDS because I have a well-organized immune system. Okay, there's another funny picture. I thought I'd do the advertising for the American Apitherapy Society. And you see on the right side the swelling in the eye. I'm going to skip that and skip that. Apimin makes the most specific blockage of calcium-dependent potassium channels in the world. Nothing does better than apimin. And what that means, it enhances long-term synaptic transmission of the nerve axons. It also selectively depresses after hyperpolarization. What that means is you get more neurological transmission down the nerve with apimin than otherwise. There are utility players, epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, and bee venom. And the clinical applications, since I'm looking at time, I need to go pretty quickly here. We do have research. This is happening in Greece this summer. And this is the obligatory slide that every good scientist has to show, which is totally illegible and unreadable. So I wanted you to see my unreadable slide. But what we have here are things like in Croatia, they're looking at propolis and bladder cancer. In Greece, they're looking at things like diabetes and blood sugar. They're looking at bee venom in many types of ways. So the research is vibrant. It just ain't happening in America. Anti-inflammation, I'm going to skip through this in the spirit of time, but please email me, md@weeksmd.com. I'm going to kind of summarize that they're finding that, md@weeksmd.com, they're finding that bee venom is very potent and it may be an alternative to treatment for arthritis in humans. They're finding that it blocks the superoxide production. They're finding that it actually induces apoptosis and reduces fibroblast proliferation and synovial inflammation. It has an anti-inflammatory effect, which is probably mediated centrally by muscarinic type 2 receptors. Cancer. Thank you very much, Norman Shealy. This is a superb statement. So because I do the PowerPoint, I can add this. Every thought is a prayer, and he and I agree that we must not give up the ghost if we're to be healthy. And I always tell my patients, if you're looking at cancer, you have to do three things. But the first thing is less bad, more good. I would much rather have people stop eating something like McDonald's than to start taking magic pills. Stop the junk before you start taking the expensive, fancy remedies, in my opinion. Kill or remove the cancer cells. Stephen Eyre in the audience who will speak tomorrow taught me to use insulin potentiation therapy, which is fantastic at killing cells. But don't be satisfied there. You also have to take down the cancer welcome sign, and you have to enhance immunity. So there are a variety of studies which show that bee venom, either alone or in conjunction with what are called immunoconjugates, where they link bee venom to other proteins, actually are doing a superb job with bladder cancer, breast cancer, hepatocellular carcinomas. Melatonin inhibits the proliferation of osteosarcoma. Again, melatonin is that component in bee venom, through an upregulating FAS expression inducing apoptosis. As we heard last year from Jorge, iodine is essential for apoptosis. And so apoptosis fights against cancer. Lung cancer research has been done. These results suggest to Polly that bee venom may exert an anti-tumor effect on human lung cancer. Hyaluron promotes tumorigenesis, and of course the bee venom has hyaluronidase in it. The in vivo experiment indicated that bee venom could be used as a chemoprotective agent against malignant tumors. So I'm going to skip for time here. Melatonin alone is extremely toxic to cells and induces immediate cell lysis, but becomes inactive when coupled with avidin, which is the immune conjugate. The incorporation of both of these target sequence into the peptide was used as a means for targeting tumor cells. So you're going to hear more about bee venom in the future of cancer research, but it's not going to be specifically called bee venom. It'll be the active ingredients, so to speak. On MS, quickly, the main star here is not only the anti-inflammatory components, but also this apimin substance. And the apimin basically allows more neurological conduction per impulse in the nerve cells. Bee venom suppresses suppressor T cells. That helps spare the myelin sheath. And acute pain, like the bee sting, is immunostimulating, so I never mix bee venom with Procaine and other things that many other doctors do. Clinical benefits in a nutshell: arthritis, all types, frozen shoulders, sciatica, back pain, neurological illnesses, ALS, Parkinson's. I can speak from my experience in my practice. Cancers, breast, prostate, colon, melanomas, and all the infectious diseases are going to be aided by the immune stimulating effects of the bee venom. It does hurt, so when you do it with people, you want to make sure they know it's coming. Don't sneak up behind them. This is a picture of my daughter. This is not related to bee venom, but it's a nice picture of pain. I like to understand that there's an irritant counter-irritant process where you actually, by delivering the bee venom, you focus the immune system at the site. Hippocrates said, "Give me the power to create fever and I will cure all illness." So here's a picture of a fever. In goes the sting. Here's a picture of someone's buttocks with a little herpes lesion before and after the bee sting. You can see perhaps the redness. We've created a fever at that spot. Those herpes viruses don't stand a chance with that fever, which could last 24 hours. Shingles, very painful. You can see big swelling created by the bee venom around it, again creating a fever. This is a plantar wart on this person's left hand, and you can see a big swelling. Again, when the swelling came down, the plantar wart was gone. A picture of the bee venom stinger into the skin. This gentleman had multiple car accidents and multiple surgeries, had terrible life, was on pain medications after we treated him, ended up with 80% recovery range of motion. Very happy. Yeah, now here's this eye again. I was going to close with this quickly. I didn't think about this until I was preparing this slide, but 2 weeks ago I went to my optometrist's I took my kids and everyone for every 5-year checkup, and he said to me, "Brad, your vision is better than it was in 1996. It had gotten worse, too much reading, too much lecturing, whatever." And he said, "Your right eye is much better than your left eye." He could see, these guys can split this apart. Now, it just occurred to me like a couple days ago that I should probably say I cannot vouch for this. I wouldn't recommend this as a treatment for vision. But my right eye sure got a fever compared to my left eye. Now, I'm going to close with Rudolf Steiner, who's the father of anthroposophical medicine and a great inspiration to me, some quotes about venoms. He says, "Poisons are gatherers of what is spiritual. For this reason, they are healing remedies. The remarkable thing is this, that a substance that can make a man ill or even kill him can also cure him. This is one of the great responsibilities one has in the preparation of medicines, for there are no real remedies which, if wrongly applied, cannot cause the same illness, which they also can cure." He says, "I told you that these creatures all have a poisonous substance within them, and that this poisonous substance, if given in the right dose, is an excellent remedy." And he says, bee venom is an excellent remedy. Talked about the ego organization. Norm Shealy would understand this. People who are responsible for their thoughts and their attitudes would understand this, that the ego organization works directly in the circulation of the blood. Now, it's actually the case that his ego organization is in a mysterious way present in the poison of the bee. It is a similar force to the force which circulates your blood that is present in the bee venom. So I've given you, first of all, the fact that this is 2 seconds left. I've given you the fact that the bee venom is very well established in other countries. We're learning about it more in this country. It's being broken apart and given in all sorts of esoteric ways. Honey is what you should take home as the message. You should not be afraid to use honey. If you have questions about using bee venom and our friend the honeybee, apitherapy.org, Dr. Andrew Koken, or email myself, md@weeksmd.com. It's scientifically validated, cheap, safe, and effective. Here's Charlie Mraz with a jar of bees. Doesn't get any cheaper than that. It's corrective and empowering. And I thank you, and I hope you will be well.
Will you do